Hi everyone, welcome back to A Bar Above. I'm Chris.
And I'm Julia, and today we're going to be talking about the difference between this
and this. So stay tuned. So Mezcal has been extremely popular over the last couple of years in craft cocktails. We're seeing it all over San Francisco and on a ton of craft cocktail bar menus. So today what we're going to be talking about is some of the differences between and similarities between tequila and Mezcal.
Yeah, they're both agave spirits, and they have a lot in common in that way, but if you go and taste them, you're going to get a pretty different experience. So Mezcal is a little bit of a confusing word, because when I think of Mezcal, I think of what is in a bottle that has the word Mezcal on it.
And I do too as well, absolutely. But Mezcal is also the bigger category of anything distilled from an agave spirit.
Exactly. So tequila is actually a Mezcal, and Sotol from a couple weeks ago, which is in this direction, by the way.
That's the universal sign for that.
It's true.
Yeah, a couple weeks ago.
It might be in that direction for you, actually. But Sotol is actually a type of Mezcal as well. And you know what that means? Mezcal is a type of Mezcal.
Right.
So that can be a little bit confusing. But you know, colloquially, when you hear people say the word Mezcal, they are usually talking about what is in this bottle. So don't worry too much about that.
Right, and there's a lot of similarities between that and whiskey. So whiskey is a main category of spirit. And below that you have things like bourbon, you have rye, you have single malt scotch.
Exactly.
It's a very, very similar organization as far as that goes.
Now, as for types of Mezcal, and by that I'm talking about what's in this bottle, types of this type of spirit, there are actually some specific types with some specific rules and regulations on how they're made. They're very different from tequila, and we're not going to geek out on them right now because I don't want to lose you. I think you're going to totally just pass out and fall asleep.
There's a lot of details as far as production of Mezcal is concerned, with even just the number of varietals that you can actually have distillations from.
It's true. So we are going to geek out on that on our website. So if you're interested, just click the link in this description right under this video, and you can read all about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So now we're going to talk about just kind of how they are similar. Tequila and Mezcal are similar, but slightly different as far as the production of them go. So with any kind of agave spirit, what you start off with is the agave plant. In the case of Mezcal, it can be one of, I think it's like 39 or 40 different species. With tequila, it's typically one, the Blue Weber agave.
Right. And so what happens is you take this plant, which kind of looks like the top of a pineapple with great big leaves. They're massive. They're just massive plants, and they take something like 10 years to grow. It's incredible. And you chop off all the leaves, and you're left with something in the middle that looks like the rest of the pineapple, and it's called a piña.
Exactly.
Which is the Spanish word for pineapple.
So from that point on, you just chop it up into smaller pieces, and it goes through the roasting process. And this is where the spirits definitely diverge into different pathways.
Absolutely.
So with tequila, it's very, very kind of sterile. You're really looking to draw out the sugars and focus on the taste of the agave plant, in this case, the Blue Weber agave.
Right, so what they'll do is they'll actually take the piña and they'll cook them in an oven with steam, but there's really no other flavorings at play. There's no wood in there, there's no organic matter or anything. Well, there's piñas, but aside from that, it's really focused on cooking and bringing out the flavor of the agave itself.
Right, and you want to bring up the sugars in that way. It's going to increase the alcohol content when you go through the fermentation process, and then into final distillation. I'm not going to geek out too much, I promise you.
Just a little bit.
Just a little bit. So from here, the big difference between this and Mezcal is the way it's cooked. So with Mezcal, they have these really large earthen pits, which are lined with lava rocks. And what they do is actually put a bunch of charcoal in there and wood and heat up those lava rocks for a couple of days, and then pile in the agave hearts.
Right, the piñas. It's a very rustic process. So now you've got burning charcoal and lava rocks. You've got piña stacked on top of that. And so the natural thing to do is then cover them in dirt.
The whole thing gets covered in earth.
And what that means is when it comes to the actual cooking process, instead of the very sterile process with tequila, it is quite the opposite. And what you end up with is the smoke from the fire, from the charcoal, can't go anywhere. It can't escape because it's been buried under a bunch of dirt.
Right.
And so it goes right into this bottle.
And that smoke really persists throughout the entire spirit, so through distillation and into, from fermentation all the way through distillation, pardon me, you definitely notice the smoke characteristic of this this particular spirit.
And that's why we mentioned how they're made before we mentioned how they taste, because how they're made is exactly why they taste so different
Right.
and how. So you do get a lot of that really great, almost like spicy agave flavor in tequila typically. And obviously it certainly depends on the brand and exactly how it's made and the type. But in general, with mezcal, you're absolutely going to get a pretty strong smoke presence.
So they have many different types out there, even single village varietals, and
Wow.
there's a bunch of different categories of mezcal. And one of my favorites is actually a product called Pechuga. Now I've never had this one, but it sounds fascinating to me. And it's a really old way of making mezcal, and basically they infuse the spirit with a bunch of, spices and nuts and fruits and all kinds of crazy stuff, and then they add a chicken to it.
I don't have
And
anything to
distill it,
say.
of course. But the end result, from my understanding, is something that's much more savory of a spirit.
I would imagine. That's wild.
Yeah, it's literally wild. So now let's get into kind of the big differences when it comes to cocktails. Obviously, we talked about that smoke, and it's something that's really going to persist in the final cocktail as well.
Yeah.
So kind of like when you use a single malt scotch, a Islay whiskey in a cocktail, you dominate a spirit with that smoke. It's the same thing that's going to happen with mezcal.
Right, and so something that you can consider is if you were, for example, if you were to make a cocktail that typically uses tequila, if you were to replace all of that tequila with mezcal, you're going to be drinking a campfire.
Yeah, it can get pretty aggressive.
It's probably going to be too much.
Depending on a mezcal, of course.
That's very true, and the tequila.
Right.
But what I would recommend is to probably just cut that in half. So do half tequila, because it still brings that great agave flavor, and they do have a lot in common, but then go half on the mezcal, so you still have that smoke component, but you're not going too crazy.
Right, and the beautiful thing about it is that mezcal is a much more expensive product typically, because it's very small production stuff, and the price is definitely kind of in line with that as well. So by cutting it in half, you really add a lot of value to it, and you still preserve that agave kind of backbone in the cocktail.
And nobody has to know.
Yeah.
I'm not going to tell them.
So yeah, we'll have some more videos in the future, but we will have a lot more details on mezcal and how it's different from tequila on our website at abarabove.com, so definitely head on over there. But in the future, we'll definitely have some more videos, so stay tuned for those. And until then, have a great shift, everyone, and cheers.
Cheers.
If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, find us on Google+, or visit us at abarabove.com.